Just sort of have a quick look at some of the publican. There's some lovely photographs actually in the Crown, if you frequent that and go to the back of the bar. And courtesy of Alan here, who's with us tonight, publican at the moment, I took copies of these. John Pett was the publican and his family in 1894. And you can see there, I'll zoom in a little bit. In the back row there was Kate and Mary Pett, his wife, and the front row Emily, John Pett with young Ethel. So it was a real family place at that time. And with the backup, I'm not quite sure, but Mr. and Mrs. Romsey, whether they were part of the partnership or owned it or something. They don't figure in the landlord's lists, but presumably they had an interest because they got in on the photograph as well. And if there was any trouble, I see Mr. Romsey has his shotgun there. A couple of years later, Kate Pett, still in emphasis, she's at the back, obviously a couple of years older, still wearing the same dress. So very recognisable, and an interesting example of the cycling popularity, late Victorian popularity with cycling, possibly from other towns coming here. There's quite a few newspaper cuttings about cycle tours coming through the village. Not such a good photograph, but the very earliest, the start of the Aldbourne motor service, which was provided to take people to the railhead at Hungerford, Great Western Railways. And so that's, again, a very early photo, presumably around about First World War, I guess, judging by the vehicle. But everything, again, focused on the Crown. It's in a good position. Slightly more up to date, probably 1970s, something like that. Notice the lady of the house, perhaps of the pub, cleaning the steps thoroughly, washing them down. Not sure I see that so obviously these days, generally, but it was something you did, very respectable. This is outside the pub. Has anybody any clue? There's no notes on this photograph. Does anybody know exactly what was going on? Terry does. I thought he might.
Roy and Vi West. Roy, landlord, Vi West. Roy West is second from the left. He's the landlord.
Roy West is second to the left with the strange little wig.
On his left is Vi, his wife.
On his left is his wife, right?
On the right is Dixie Westall, who is Pam's uncle.
On the right is Dixie Westall, who is Pam's uncle.
Pam's uncle.
Oh, Pam Puttock, is that about, oh, sorry, right, yeah, okay, I'm not sure who was here.
The far left is Jeff Rawlings.
And the far left is Jeff Rawlings. So, my left or the photograph?
I can't remember the occasion. There is another photograph similar, and we do know the occasion. I can't think of it.
All right, yeah.
Anyone else?
What sort of vintage would that be then, Terry? It's got a red barrel on the door, so 60s, 70s, maybe?
70s.
Yeah.
It's the 1970 festival.
It is the festival, is it?
There's another photograph of Roy West and his wife and all the workers at the pub, all dressed in Georgian costumes, standing around the door.
Okay, I haven't got that one, so thank you for that help. Thanks, John, at the back. John, being our curator of the archive, knows those 4,000, 6,000, 8,000 pictures well enough. Yeah. Anyway, it's happier times. Right, we're now moving on our pub crawling round to the bell. Obviously a recent shot of the bell. Almost certainly named after all the bell founding activity that took place in and around the square in the 18th and 19th century. A lot of the properties associated with the Wells, the Bell's foundry, and it's almost certainly linked to that. Maybe they even had some financial interest in it at some time, but very synonymous. And prominent in 1806. Doesn't actually feature much in my dreaded newspaper articles, but obviously it was a popular local drinking place, but maybe didn't have the esteem of the Crown. 1847 it was actually put up for sale as a well-known freehold inn with a brew house, stabling and outhouses, and Thomas Bacon was the occupier at that time, paying the rent of £9.10 a year. The Bacon name I saw associated with the George Inn, but not as an inn. It was in the later days after it had become a private house. Another one's Stephen James, 1805, Thomas Bacon, as just mentioned, Robert Shepherd. And one of the most renowned, as I guess you'll remember, was Barney West. Inevitably, he was there for over 50 years. He was a real character, ex-jockey, had a lot of his drinking, a lot of his racing mates would come and see him, so it must have been a tremendous atmosphere in there. And as usual, we show the traditional picture. With Siddy Busy is this character on the left of the photograph, and Barney behind the bar. Nice simple bar as well, as you can see there at that point. As indeed many of them would have been. Almost a hatch, like I remember going to a pub in Bracknell many years ago in the 60s, and it was just a little hatch in the wall and a few bare tables. You did nothing very posh at all. Perhaps the 1960s or, well, I'm not quite sure. Judging by the dress, it could even be 1930s. The trouser style and the braces, the bikes, again, it could be a 1930s type one. I'm not too up on my fashion, but the chap standing outside the pub could easily have come from that sort of era. Very difficult to tell. Okay, another lost pub, the Queen Vic, well, as it's usually referred to, but of course that wasn't always the case. It was a cottage in 1806 at the time of the enclosure. Seems to have opened as an inn a little bit later on. Again, it may well have arisen because of the demand from the passing stagecoach trade. It was just called the Queen when it first opened, but 1855 it was sort of upgraded and became the Queen Victoria. Why did it open there? As I say, as a hint, because it was opposite the stage stop in West Street, but that didn't actually at that time serve any beer, and so the obvious opportunity to open a pub just opposite. It may have only held a beer licence in the early days, as indeed I mentioned earlier, they needed a separate licence, but it certainly added wines and spirits. Somebody told me only a few weeks ago that they remember going in there and it only serving beer, but I certainly have found that it closed in 1971, and if you look closely, this is obviously perhaps a 50s or 60s photograph. If you look at a closer image, when they were selling Red Barrel, over the door it clearly says it's licensed for beer, wines and spirits. So that may well have been a beer-only place originally which developed. Again, an idea, judging by the bells outside, golden-looking bells, but just a general carnival. It was a standard sort of decoration at carnival time, perhaps. I didn't know that it was a special Queen's Jubilee, Queen's Silver Jubilee. Yeah. Again, the Red Barrel sort of dates it to the late 60s, early 70s time. Again, not very many photographs of that particular establishment, but there's a few. But of course, just across the road, many of you recall the Mason's Arms just off West Street. Obviously a more recent photograph. This is interesting because, as I say, the stagecoach which left London in the 1780s used to pass through Aldbourne a few days later, and you could buy tickets onwards, in either direction presumably, but onwards perhaps towards Swindon and that way, and you could buy your tickets from West Street House, but it didn't actually serve drink or provide accommodation, hence presumably the Queen Vic, or the Queen as it was then, opening up opposite. But by the 1830s, with the improved, even the daily service backwards and forwards to London, you had to get up very early for the stagecoach, but it did reach from Swindon to London in a day. So obviously the roads were much better. So this is West Street House as you see it today, and although it only served at the rear of the house became a very small inn, and it certainly existed in 1895 as a small inn, and presumably was called, for some reason, the Mason's Arms. I don't know again why that would have been the case. It may be down to trade, a trade like the masonry, that sort of thing. It might be something to do with the masons, or I don't know. Anyway, it remained very small, very popular. It was open briefly when I first came to the village in 2003, but closed in 2007, as you all may well know. Small but popular. Now moving on, another couple of less remembered drinking places, unless you were around in 1627. Apparently there was a Grazels, or now Grasils, a Grazels Inn up that way. It seems likely that it was because of the very popular byway. Remember, the route out of the village at that time would have been preferred to go up past the green, up past Beech Knoll, because it's much drier. Although it has a few puddles, it's far drier than Lottage would have been in the days when the stream flowed through that area. And it leads directly on to Bishopston. So a preferred area, so a good opportunity to sell ale of one sort or another. And there was certainly a brewing premises on the side of Beech Knoll, not necessarily Beech Knoll House itself, but somewhere in that vicinity, so it may be associated with that. But that's about the only mention, 1627. Perhaps it faded, the Civil War came along not long after that. There was also the sign of the windmill. Tricky one, located on the hill towards Baden. And of course, as you may know from Windmill Close at the top, there was a windmill at the top of that hill for many, many years. And so there may be some link between the grain milled at the top and selling the ale a bit further down the hill. There's not much known about it. It seems to have closed by the early 1800s. But it seemed to be in the property generally referred to now as number 22 Oxford Street. So that's the popular there. It's believed to be the thatched part of that property. And I think Pam here.
I was born in that house.
Pam Puttick down here was born in that house. We won't say when, Pam, we'll use it discreetly.
1928.
1928. And I did ask Pam some weeks ago, because the rumour has that there were some cellars still in the house. I think you said you didn't recall them.
I was saying to my friends, I can remember now, I think out the back there was a door which we were dared to go.
Yes, because that would have gone into the chalk hillside, wouldn't it? 'Cause it's quite steep at the back, I think.
It might have been like a cellar thing or something, but I can't remember.
So Pam saying as a young child she was sort of dared not to go into there. It was a sort of creepy place, I could imagine, at the back, because it rises very steeply on that chalk bank. So that certainly seems to have been the sign of the windmill as another one of the lost pubs. Right, we'll have a little look now to around where the sites where the brewing took place. In the trade directories, which are fairly easily accessible these days, regular reference to landowners, tradesmen, also being listed as maltsters. There were fustian makers and they were maltsters as well. So it was definitely an active sideline, not a main activity. And it, as we mentioned earlier, it could just have been an outhouse just at the back of other buildings. Probably the most significant representation of that now is the old malt house along South Street. Certainly it's iconic. It's got its traditional revolving vent at the top there with the what's the name? Maltster. Couldn't think of the phrase. Maltster and his shovel. Perhaps it should be a slightly bigger shovel. The malt shovels traditionally are very big wooden shovels. That looks a little bit on the light side, but nevertheless in the same spirit. I understand that was a wooden sign for many, many years and was only replaced as a metal one, some tens of years ago. So probably the original one was a bit more traditional in the large malt size. So that's the malt house with a long history. It even features, in 1806, it was featured in a painting of South Street, so it's been around a long time. Also good evidence of a brew house on the site of Bay House. We have Ishbel with us this evening. She's going to correct me on this. I'm going to have to go carefully here.
It was the last place in the village that they malted beer.
Indeed, and I think we can move on. Yes, it was the last place that Ishbel said that they malted beer in the village.
And the malt house, that's why we have one tree in the garden that is flat, because it was against the brew house.
Right, so there's a tree that grew up against the brew house, and it's the tree still there.
We have the soakaway, which is in what had been the old pigsty.
Indeed, and the soakaway is still evidence of that. I'll move on because there's a picture of your house, I think you would agree. That's Bay House, where Ishbel lives, and it probably ceased as recently as 1907, so just over 100 years ago. And there were later excavations made which did reveal this sub-ground brick-lined tunnels and holding drains. This diagram may not show up too well. I did my best. There's an old photograph there's a photograph of a diagram from the 1940s when it was excavated, and then I've redrawn it to make it stand out a little more clearly up there. And I think, as you can possibly see, if I turn around with this one, probably my printer won't show up. No, it won't show up too well. There's a if I move around, that's all right. There's the tunnel, quite an extensive tunnel, 5 foot wide, 5 foot high, below ground. And then the red outline is the outer upper wall, which is above ground. So it's quite a substantial piece of work, and some they're of the order of 50 feet in length from one end to the other, and then it disappeared into somebody else's house, who I read as Mr. Purver's house in 1946, I think it was. I don't know that name from anywhere else. Does anybody?
That's next door to us.
That's next door, towards the forge, you mean?
Yes.
Yes.
That was the purpose when we came to the village in '59.
Right.
Mrs. Purver still lived in that.
Right, so Mrs. Purver was still living in 1959 when Ishbel moved in, and that's the house that Joy Atkins... Is Joy here tonight?
No, she's on
No.
cruise.
Okay, Joy Atkins has recently been occupying. So possibly the tunnel, that's what confused me. The way the diagram is drawn, it seems to be going the wrong direction. Let's turn it up on its head somehow. But it seems to be the wrong end somehow. It seems like a mirror image of what you'd expect from the description. But anyway, if I just move on to a cross-section, the cross-section through it, as I say, below ground level, is this very substantial brick-lined tunnel. It had pipes and gutters running through it, and a wood-lined floor. So it really was quite a substantial brew house, which, as I say, as Ishbel suggests as well, that was running until the early 20th century.
It was only taken down after the Second World War.
Right, so I guess that's the time that the annotation on this photograph is 1946, so that sort of fits with when it was demolished, or at least reduced. But I guess if you excavate it, obviously it may still be there, the actual footings, so to speak.
Probably, but we're not going to.
Well, we're not going to. Right, we'll draw a veil over that. Similarly, a few years the courthouse certainly had its own brewing premises at the back there, quite a substantial building. And as I mentioned previously, somewhere on the site of Beech Knoll there was a brewery as well, and no doubt many other places around. So obviously if you're brewing beer from a variety of premises, it's very difficult to control. And remember the legislation I mentioned earlier on. There's always somebody who was trying to get round the legislation. Charles and Thomas Gould, their name popped up earlier. It keeps on popping up to doing with the trade in the village. But there's a newspaper report, 1850. The suspicions of the excise officers have been excited, as the quote, because Charles Gould was paying more money for malting barley, good quality barley, but selling his malt for less money than the other maltsters. It seemed a bit suspicious. Why would you want to spend a lot of money and then not appear to be selling at the top price? And he was assisted by his 2 sisters. He didn't employ anybody. Again, a bit suspicious perhaps. And he advertised that he had 50 quarters of malt to sell, but he'd only paid the excise on 30. So the excise then searched the property and they found 115 sacks of malt. Not sure how that relates to the quarters, but anyway, quite a lot of malt. And the newspaper concludes with a report rather starkly, he has a and there's sadly no further mention of poor old Charles. He disappears from the newspaper records. Another story that perhaps we could try and follow up somehow. Not sure what happened to his 2 sisters. Anyway, we're still very pleasing. We've still got a brewery in Aldbourne, only just, as I mentioned earlier, the Ramsbury Brewery on the site of Stock Close Farm on the back road to Axford. If you've not been up there recently, it's no longer the tin shed that it almost was across one side of the road. It is a really super place now. If you've not been up there, I do thoroughly recommend you go. We have a representative, because Hazel Keane now works up there, She's the reception and looks after you, and she's been very helpful in providing some materials, which I'll mention in a moment. They've got a splendid shop there, and we're all associated with the Ramsbury beers over the last few years, 13 years they think they've been running now. And it's got a splendid conference meeting room up there, and they entertain. You can have pig roasts and all sorts of things outside. A very nice place to take visitors. The shop's open in normal shop hours, and well worth a visit. I would have held this meeting up there, but I thought the numbers would probably dwindle if I asked you all to head up towards Stock Close Farm. But I certainly would consider it. Perhaps we ought to have a visit there just to learn a little bit more about the brewing trade. And so my thanks to Hazel and the other staff at Ramsbury. As you came in, you may or may not have noticed I put a display on this evening of various things to do with barley and wheat and the brewing and the malt, and so there's some hops up there which are lovely to smell. Interestingly, the hops were regarded as being grown wild up in Stock Close in the 20th century, so perhaps it's inevitable that the brewery should end up there. So I think now it's time for me to wind up and call the time, gentlemen, please. Well, you used to have to ring the bell. We still do it in the pub these days, on this little call around Aldbourne. There's a few extra little points. There's teas and coffees as usual, courtesy of the barrel at the back there. And I see the letters appeared. Oh yes, it wasn't in at the beginning, but she's doing a bit now. But if you want to try some of the local Ramsbury brews, there's some bottles over there. Feel free to open up any you want to try, and there's some small glasses. So you're not going to have a riotous evening, but feel free to try those either as well as the coffee or as well as the tea. And just acknowledge the sources of information. Good old Ida Gandy is still a very useful source with her book, and Maurice Crame's a fairly rare book now. It's difficult to find the Aldbourne Chronicle, but very useful. It chronicles everything about Aldbourne, as you might guess from the title. And I mentioned the license to sell, this book here, which is brilliant. There's another one, Discovering Pub Names and Signs, which is interesting. And The English Village, which is generally a very good book about English villages by Martin Wainwright, and it's got a fairly chunky section about pubs and the rest of it. And then, and do remember, of course, alcohol does not cause hangovers. It's the waking up.